Good morning. I want to welcome everybody to this latest edition of Ask the Expert series. I am so excited to be joined by my good friend, Raleigh Sadler. Raleigh is the executive director of Let My People Go, a national initiative to fighting human trafficking. Raleigh is also the author of Vulnerable, Rethinking Human Trafficking, which is available on Amazon. You can check out Let My People Go at lmpg.org. But we're devoting this Ask the Expert series to talk about something that unfortunately the church does not talk about often enough. And it is a travesty to see what is happening in our nation concerning human trafficking. And Raleigh is an expert in this area. But he's also a good friend. And so, Raleigh, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Rob, thanks for having me. It really means a lot given that you have basically been around since the start of Let My People Go, several years ago.
Absolutely. Yeah. What year did you officially start?
So we started as a movement in 2013, and I think we got 501c3 status in 2016.
Okay. Raleigh, for just a little bit about yourself, could you briefly share with our audience your story, a little bit about your background, and what led you to saying, yes, this initiative of fighting human trafficking is what I'm going to devote my life to?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very interesting because I went to seminary, like you're supposed to, and I was going to be a pastor, and I actually really wanted to be a college pastor. But I remember during that time, I had zero desire to devote my life to justice and mercy initiatives. None. My focus was to proclaim the gospel. And I think that there's something worthy there. And God, in his providence, brought me to a historically Black college and university in West Virginia, which is a historically white state. And it was there where campus ministers and deans were coming alongside of me because I was serving as a college pastor. And they said, we get that you proclaim the gospel. I think that's a beautiful thing. But what does it look like to demonstrate the gospel? One pastor went so far as saying, he's like, some of my critics say that I believe in the social gospel. He's like, I don't at all. But I do believe that the gospel has social ramifications. And it's these things that started to stick with me. And it was during that time that I realized, I had just graduated seminary. I'd been in church the majority of my life, but for some reason, something was missing. And it hit me that I am made right with God, not because of what I've done, but because of what he's done. His finished work for me is what saved me. It's not the strength of my faith. I don't know if I believe I was a believer, but there's something that just shifted to where I realized just how free I was because of Jesus's life, death, and resurrection in my place. And it was then when I realized there was absolutely zero to worry about on the vertical side, I began to focus on the horizontal. And so I began to think about issues of justice. I began to think about how my neighbor was impacted by systemic injustice and different types of injustices. And I started looking around and I was like, okay, like, what does it look like for me to love my neighbor? And right around that time, I took my students to a conference called Passion in Atlanta. And Christine Caine was speaking, and she was talking about how we all create a demand for exploitation. Every one of us, regardless of how good we are, how little we sin, whatever, we create a demand. It could be that cheap t-shirt that you're wearing, or that pornography that you just consumed, or the food that you're eating. We have to think through, where do the products that we crave come from? Because everything that we consume has been touched by another human. And we have to ask, did they have agency? Were they allowed to do it? And right around that time, as Christine Caine was talking, I felt very convicted. And it wasn't like, I don't know, it was that thing where you're like, did I eat something? Something's wrong. Clearly, God's not calling me to fight human trafficking, because there is absolutely nothing that I can do to fight human trafficking. I didn't go to police academy. I wasn't trained as a lawyer. I do not have the tools to be the person that I feel like in this moment I may be getting called to be. And I did something immediately upon feeling that. One, I repented of my sins. I realized, wow, God, I'm part of this. And as soon as I repented, that's when the feeling or that this thing and right here just started happening. And I just didn't know what it was. So I did the only thing I knew to do. I stuffed it down. And for the next year, I had this internal call, but then I started getting this external call. All these people were saying, you know what, Raleigh's called to fight trafficking. I'm like, no, I'm not. Raleigh's called to fight trafficking. I'm like, no, I'm not. But it just consistently kept coming. And then, you know, my job ended. They were cutting funding to collegiate ministry in West Virginia. I was in a relationship that ended. One of my best friends was dying of cancer. And it was when one of my best friends was dying that I was sitting at his house, kind of spending his last days with him. And I remember reading a book called, I think it was called The Final Enemy. And it basically said something like, you will die. Everyone you know will die. They will eat bad egg salad and then they will move on. It was like that stark. And I'm like, but it was comforting because it hit me. And I thought, you know what? My life has an expiration date. What am I going to do? And I just say, God, I'm done running. I'm just done. So I sold everything that I owned, started raising support, and I moved to New York City to fight human trafficking, even though I didn't know what that meant. And God just was there every step of the way. And I fell in with the right people. I started working on an anti-trafficking campaign. I started working in other anti-trafficking organizations. Then I started Let My People Go. And so that's basically the gospel kind of led me to love my neighbor. And then God made it more and more clear.
That's awesome. Raleigh, so people, as I said in the intro, people have heard about human trafficking, but I don't think the church has any idea how bad it is. And you have become an expert in this area. And as you talked about, you felt very unworthy to become an expert in this area, but you have spent so many years just studying this, researching it, and could you share for those listening some of the statistics and some of the sobering realities of human trafficking in North America?
Absolutely. And before I start, I would say statistics with human trafficking are murky at best. A lot of times when we see a news report or we read an article online, you may be getting dated statistics. And so when I give statistics, I typically stay very general, but there are many organizations in your community as well as other communities that will give statistics based on their findings with the people that they're working with. And I found that those are, I trust those often because they're very localized. But at the end of the day, you know, when you think about human trafficking, there are as many as 40 million people who are trafficked around the world at any given moment. Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. When we think of human trafficking, it's very easy to think of everything being sex trafficking because that's what we see in the movies, that's what we see on the news. But 22% of all of those who are trafficked, this is a UN report, 22% of all those who are trafficked for sex, while 68% are trafficked for forced labor. So your neighbor who could be being trafficked may not be someone who is trafficked into prostitution or pornography or into an online webcam situation or mail order brides. They may be the person who is holding a sign in your community. They may be trafficked so for panhandling. They may be trafficked to do door-to-door sales. They may be picking soybeans in your community or working different jobs in construction and different various types of labor. They may be in the hospitality industry, changing your sheets. We have to start, they may be in your nail salon or your local massage parlors. We have to start asking, the question behind the question. When we engage people who give us services, we need to say, hey, how are you doing? And when they say fine, you need to ask, so tell me your story, and build a relationship, because that's the only way that we're going to find this information out. But ultimately, with statistics like this, we realize that human trafficking can happen anywhere because there are vulnerable people everywhere. And honestly, if you think about it, whether it's for sex, labor, or domestic servitude, or in developing nations, organ trafficking, regardless of the purpose of human trafficking, it happens when someone with power exploits someone with less power. And they don't have to have a lot of power, but someone with a little bit more leverages what they have over someone else. Human trafficking is the exploitation of vulnerability for commercial gain.
Raleigh, for those that are members of Coral Ridge and you're watching this, whether you're watching it live or watching it at a later date, I can't remember where we fall on the scale, but if you don't think this is an issue in our own backyard, we need to think again. I remember talking to a member of Homeland Security that used to be a member of our church, and I think between the Port of Miami and Port Everglades right here in Fort Lauderdale, it is one of the largest gateways of human trafficking into this nation, obviously along with New York City and Atlanta. But this is something that's happening in our own backyard. And as Raleigh said, I mean, the statistics he's sharing are staggering, but even those are murky and dated. And I think this is a problem of epic proportions that I just don't even think we have any idea how bad it is.
No, and right before the pandemic, I live in Chicago now. Right before the pandemic, I got connected to the South Florida Human Trafficking Task Force. And I think I'm a member of it, even though I don't live there. But they're like, you were a Floridian once, so we respect that. But they are doing an incredible work. And what they're finding is it's very prevalent in South Florida. It is there. It is hidden in plain sight, but you are surrounded by those who are, could be, and have been trafficked. Because everyone who's vulnerable to exploitation could be, is being, or has been trafficked for sex, labor, or domestic servitude.
All right, so that's where Let My People Go comes in. And so if you're sitting and you're watching this, you're hearing the statistics, you're hearing about what's happening not only in our nation but around the globe. This is an international industry, and this is what has led Raleigh to start Let My People Go. So Raleigh, how does Let My People Go answer the call and meet this felt need?
When I felt called, I remember thinking, well, what do I have to offer? I think I said something in my book to the effect of, I wear cardigans. How am I going to kick down the door of a brothel? Like, I didn't know my place. And I feel like a lot of us in the church are there. And so the more I started thinking about it, the more I realized, wait a minute, I know church. I know ministry. I began in ministry in, I think the year 2000 was when I started as an intern at my Baptist Collegiate Ministry. And so I understand ministry. I understand how ministers work. And I also understand, as someone who has served on pastoral staff, sometimes nonprofits will come in and say, hey, we have a need. Will you partner with us? And it's really good and it's compelling, but they don't know how to speak church. They don't know how to speak to the people in the pew. And that's no fault of their own. Sometimes the people in the pew just don't know how to receive it. But what I found was there seems to be it's like ships in the night sometimes. And it hit me, I do know how to speak to this audience. I am this audience. And so what I started thinking about was, how can we help the local church to fight human trafficking? And the mission of Let My People Go is empowering the local church to fight human trafficking by loving those most vulnerable. And so we work with the church not to necessarily institute another program, because it's very easy to do that, but we want to help them create an overall approach, really. We want the church to be able to focus on their neighbor as a congregation like they never have before. And so we work with the church to help them develop a congregational model as well as a collaborative one with the gospel as its motive. We want to help the church as a congregation learn how to identify, empower, protect, and include their most vulnerable neighbor, because each community is going to have a different vulnerable neighbor. One neighbor may be a new immigrant. One neighbor may be a young person, a young woman, a single mom. Those in the LGBTQ community in New York, they're most often targeted. It could be someone in the community of color. In Chicago, those who are exploited for trafficking are those who are in the community of color. It could be someone who is a refugee, someone who's new to the community. It could be someone with mental health issues, someone who is experiencing different disabilities. Traffickers will look for those who are most vulnerable around them. And so it could look differently in every community. So we help the church do a community needs assessment. And in that assessment, we help them talk to the right people in the community so that they can not only identify those who are most vulnerable, but that they can identify those who are working with those most vulnerable so that they can have a collaborative structure. And then we, through our training materials, and our coaching, we offer them pathways to figuring out, okay, once we identify those most vulnerable, how do we empower them? What does it look like to protect them in our church so that they don't get re-exploited? And how do we actually include them so that they are one of us and not someone who's just kind of an outlier and he's, or she is getting food or things like that, but they're not actually being given significance or love or attention. And so really that's what we're doing. And what's exciting is in this pandemic, we've decided to pivot, and we're actually making our handbook and supplemental materials free for churches who desire it, for churches who want to partner in that. Because right now, and this is new, our handbook has not been free up until recently. And now we're looking at it and saying, we want churches to have this content. And we want churches to partner with us. But we just want churches to start this, and we want to help them care for their most vulnerable neighbor.
Raleigh, you go to the website, it's lmpg.org. You go to lmpg.org, let my people go. What could people find on that website? What are some of the resources that people could get more engaged, more informed? What would be a reason to go to that website today to find out more about your ministry, but also to find out more about human trafficking?
So a lot of times people will ask, well, what do I do to fight human trafficking now? On our website, we have several clickable documents, several videos of survivors who have been through it. And I think if you are to learn about human trafficking, you should always listen to survivors. You should prioritize their voices. Because, they know what they're talking about, and they also are best equipped to help us fight it. But on our website, you will find 100 ways to fight human trafficking today, a clickable document. You will find moving forward, how to prepare for the aftermath of COVID. Because let's think about it. Those who were vulnerable before the pandemic are now more so. And those who were not vulnerable before the pandemic are now experiencing vulnerability for the first time. And traffickers, a lot of them are experiencing certain levels of distress and frustration. So it's driving them to exploit. And a lot of this exploitation is happening online. And so we have to think, okay, as a church, our community is already looking different than it did before the pandemic. And once the pandemic clears, we're going to basically go outside, figuratively, and it's going to be a new world. It's going to be different. Things will not go back to normal. Things will not go back to business as normal. So how do we prepare for that? And so there are clickable documents like that. There are others. And then there are videos that you can watch with your church where we talk through these things. And then, there are links. There's a link to my book on the website. You can also find that on Amazon, which is a good primer for those of faith who are trying to think through, what do we do? I mean, that's why I wrote it, because I was thinking, what did I need to do? What did I need to know? And how do you sustain yourself in this push for freedom, this fight for freedom?
I want to encourage everybody to go to lmpg.org. That stands for Let My People Go. I would encourage you, you could spend 30 minutes on that website. It is so informational, but also inspirational. There are, much like Raleigh, who never thought that they could be involved in fighting human trafficking. The videos just are just moving. Like he said, there's resources, blogs, documents. You can purchase his book, Vulnerable, Rethinking Human Trafficking. But just do yourself a favor, go to that website. There's also an opportunity to give. Obviously, Let My People Go is a nonprofit organization and depends on the generous support of donors who are like-minded and want to join Raleigh and his team in fighting human trafficking. So go to lmpg.org, be inspired, be informed, also support him and the mission at Let My People Go. But Raleigh, could I pray for you and for your...
Absolutely.
Father, thank you for just this short time with Raleigh and just being able to expose the community to what is happening in our nation and around the world. Lord, I thank you for using people like us, Lord, people who are not worthy, people who are the least likely candidates to be used for your kingdom. But that's what you do, Lord. You use broken vessels. You use people that never thought it'd be possible to do something like fighting human trafficking, and you use us for your glory. Lord, I pray that that the gospel would move deep into the church in North America in such a way that it would transform us to wanting to fight for the most vulnerable in our society. And Lord, I thank you for Raleigh not running from the call, but answering the call humbly. I thank you for just his work in this area. Lord, I pray that you would, Lord, that you would raise up other like-minded men and women to support Raleigh, whether it be with Let My People Go, whether it's through generous financial support, whether it's through churches saying, yes, we're going to partner with Let My People to Go to, because Raleigh can't do this by himself. And it will take the church to wake up to how big of a problem this is, to wake up to the travesty happening in our nation of human trafficking. Lord, I thank you for also just the small ways in which Raleigh just shared with us, in which we can answer the call, just engaging people, asking people their story. Lord, that's what you've called us to do anyway. You've called us to communicate with people, to share the love of Christ with people, to engage with our neighbor. Lord, if there was ever a time that we need to engage with our neighbor, it's today. It's now. Lord, with this world has been turned upside down, but in the midst of a global pandemic, we know that this problem of human trafficking has been existing for far too long. And Lord, I pray that the church would answer the call. So Lord, I pray that Raleigh would be encouraged and that you would supply himself and Let My People Go with everything they need to fight the good fight, to answer the call of the gospel for the sake of the kingdom. And it's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And that's a wrap for this latest edition of Ask the Expert series. If you were inspired by this conversation with Raleigh today, this talk will be found on the archives page on the Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church YouTube channel. please forward this to a friend, a family member, as we want to get the word out to what's happening with Let My People Go and human trafficking in North America and across the globe. But thanks again.